They are giving their lives in order for us to reign victorious over our enemies and to return our hostages. We are doing and will be doing everything in our power to protect the lives of our soldiers. Each and every one of them is dear to us, and we will use every means available to us in order to...
Mr. Perry, this is some of what we've heard from the Israeli premier. What didn't we hear?
Oh, we didn't hear anything that would give the Israelis and the Palestinians hope for a horizon for the future that is anything other than continued conflict, I'm sad to say. We did hear a lot of determination by all three that I think reflects a consensus in Israel that the original goal of the operation, which is the removal of Hamas from Gaza, remains in place, and Israel is very much determined to do this. And, you know, we can criticize the tactics of the operation and we can argue about the day after, but it is important to note that 10 weeks into the war, that consensus remains. And, you know, living here, I know it reflects a consensus in society. Israel needs Hamas to be gone from Gaza, like human beings need oxygen to breathe.
Yes.
And I think the Gazan people need that too. That must happen. Now, the issue of the day after is very much in debate. We can talk about that all day.
Before the day after, because a lot had been said and wasn't said in this respect, to the point of the war objective that remained as is, there is perhaps mild doubt, I would dare to say, this weekend, whether the two objectives of this war, releasing the hostages and dismantling Hamas, the ruling notion was that the two are not just not contradicting one another, but rather contributing to one another, as in the military pressure on releasing the hostages. Of course, due to yesterday's tragedy, there is again, a mild doubt, especially when we're talking about the families of the hostages who, as we speak, are marching to the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, demanding a new outline now.
What happened yesterday was a tactical tragedy on the ground. I mean, the soldiers completely misunderstood the situation, and it reflects how on edge everyone's nerves are, understandably, in a situation like you have in southern Gaza. You know, critics are going to say it reflects a light trigger finger that explains the big casualty figures also. I'm a little bit hesitant to judge the troops who are in that situation. It's just heartbreaking, and I think, again, you have consensus that that was terrible. But the big picture remains the same. You could argue it two different ways. You could say, keep attacking Hamas, because when they reach a level of absolute desperation, that's when they'll be more reasonable about the terms for releasing the hostages. Or you could say the polar opposite.
Right.
And really, it comes down to speculation about how Yahya Sinwar will operate. And we're talking here about a man who is very likely to be a psychopath.
Yeah.
So speculating about what he's going to do is a little bit of an exercise in futility. But the families of hostages absolutely want Israel to project that it's willing to do everything, including everything, to gain the release. But I mean, viewers should know what that means. That means that not only will Israel probably have to release every Palestinian it holds, including some pretty bad people, but also stop the war with Hamas left in charge. That would be a victory for global jihadism that would have downstream implications for Israel, the region, and the world. I don't know. I mean, perhaps I would be pushing for that if my brother was in Gaza,
right.
But I don't know. But you know, when you're personally involved, that doesn't make you more knowledgeable about a situation. It makes you traumatized. Yes. So I think
this entire nation is traumatized,
yes.
and thus perhaps.
I understand the government's position that continued pressure on Hamas is the more likely path to bring about the release, heartbreaking though it would be, even though it prolongs the captivity and risks events as happened yesterday.
It's been interesting, of course, the numbers, the metrics behind how many of these aerial objects, the rockets, the drones have been intercepted here has been kept private by both militaries, the IDF here and the different factions in southern Lebanon not reporting any of the specifics behind this, so we can't really dive into those numbers, but it has been a serious threat here, these unmanned drones.
I24 News correspondent Zach Anders from the Israel-Lebanon border. Thank you very much for your reporting today. Back here in the studio with Mr. Dan Perry. The no diplomacy, so to speak, is ruling the discourse when we're talking about the day after in the Gaza Strip. When we're talking about the north, we do hear perhaps more from the Israeli leadership, the Israeli Prime Minister saying that yes to the diplomatic route when it comes to Lebanon, and yet no guarantees that there will be no military action. So to an extent, again, a mirror image of what we're seeing in the south. First a military campaign, then some sort of a diplomatic solution. In the north, the exact opposite.
Well, Hezbollah hasn't yet attacked, invaded, and committed a horrible pogrom.
Yeah.
They've just involved themselves in provocations and low-level fighting. So, yeah, I mean, I think Israel is well within its rights to demand the implementation of 1701 and to have Hezbollah move north and stay away from the border, not threaten the population. But how to force them to do that is an open question. Will diplomacy conceivably suffice is something one can doubt, realistically, because there's no government in Lebanon. There's no president in Lebanon. There's no head of the army in Lebanon. Lebanon's a bit of a fictitious entity. Lebanon's a militia with a country, not a country that has a militia. So will Israel really, at the end of the day, risk another war with an organization that has many tens of thousands of long-range rockets aimed at the studio? I don't know. It's a conundrum.
Yes, and still several, over 100,000 Israeli refugees in their own country from south and north in this respect. Mr. Perry, before we have to wrap it up, perhaps your thoughts on what we again did here when it comes to the day after in the Gaza Strip, or what was ruled out, essentially, any Palestinian entity taking over.
Yeah, and frankly, I think that was reckless of the Prime Minister. And to compare the Hamas, which is absolutely comparable to Islamic State and to the worst terrorist groups that existed in history, some compare them to the Nazis. To compare Hamas to the Palestinian Authority, that for the past 20 years, despite its inadequacies, has executed a security collaboration with Israel in the West Bank, does its best to not create wars, and has sufficed with diplomatic maneuvers, hoping to somehow get a state. I mean, look, they're far from perfect. I don't like many things about the Palestinian Authority.
Not popular among the Palestinians for several of the reasons.
No, but but what does that leave us with?
Yeah.
Netanyahu's comments leave Israel with the eternal occupation of Gaza. And that will be a messy business whose end will be ugly. And I would hope that cooler heads prevail.